Hello, Youest, you listener. Oh my gosh, so excited to have you here. This is going to be such a powerful conversation. So thank you for your time, your energy. Thank you for being part of this Youest You community. And I'm so excited to introduce you to my beautiful guest today. We're going to welcome Shelly Tygielski. Shelly is the author of Sit Down to Rise Up. Love that name. And she's the founder of the global grassroots mutual aid organization, Pandemic of Love. Her work has been featured by over 100 media outlets, including CNN Heroes, The Kelly Clarkson Show, CBS This Morning, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. A trauma-mindfulness teacher and a Garrison Institute Fellow, she has been called one of the 12 powerful women of the Mindfulness Movement by mindful.org, and teaches self-care and resilience at organizations around the world. And you can, of course, learn more about Shelly. We'll have everything in the show notes at shellytygielski.com. So without further ado, Shelly, I am so excited to have you today and just really to talk about you, your story, your amazing, powerful work in the world. And thank you for being here.
Thanks so much, Julie, for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, me too. I actually, for those that don't know you well and know you yet, would really love to hear a little bit about your backstory. Like, how did you get into the world of mindfulness? Were there any times when you maybe struggled with mindfulness? And I don't know, I'd love to hear, maybe just start there, like a little bit more about you and how you got into this work.
Well, let me start with the last question, sort of work my way backwards. So yes, I've been meditating for over 20 years and I still struggle with meditating. So that struggle is real. It never goes away. I also consider myself to be, and I talk about this in the book, an unlikely meditator. So, and I'm proud about that. Like that's not a moniker that I'm ashamed of in any way, shape, or form. And in many cases, many of us are sort of unlikely meditators, right? And that's okay, because it's still something that's incredibly accessible to us. So I started meditating in graduate school. This was in the late 90s. I was a graduate student at Columbia University in New York City, and I stumbled upon a class that had nothing to do with what my master's degree was in, but was paying for the full credit. So I was like, oh, I'm going to audit classes every semester, and that led me to classes in like pottery and violin, and like eventually to Robert Thurman's class, who, if you don't know who Robert Thurman is, he's one of the founders of Tibet House. He's the foremost expert on like what Tibetan Buddhism, a very close friend and advisor to the Dalai Lama. He also happens to be the father of Uma Thurman, but he's way more than just the father of Uma Thurman. And I went to his class. I was really interested and intrigued in learning more about Buddhism. Growing up in Israel, growing up in South Florida, never met a Buddhist, and was really intrigued to learn more about this like very sort of far away, mystical, mystical type of religion that I was like, oh, what is this? It's so interesting. And at the time I was also starting to, take yoga, which for a very long time, again, remember, this is in the late 90s. So you kind of think to yourself, like, you have to kind of transport yourself back in a time machine and be like, there wasn't a yoga studio on every corner of every street. Like, there wasn't Lululemon and there wasn't like yoga wear, there weren't mats. Like it was just, it was not something that was really like widespread. And so when you thought about yoga, or at least when I did, growing up in a very kind of Jewish bubble, where I grew up, again, in Jerusalem and then in South Florida, just with respects to like how my parents raised us, I always thought like, well, only Buddhists practice yoga, or like only Buddhists meditate, So as I started to practice yoga and learn more about just sort of the world of meditation, and there's a whole backstory to how that was seeded in me. The summer before when I met two Zen Buddhists who are Japanese. But fast forward, sitting in Dr. Thurman's class, he would always tell us about these free meditation classes and just sessions, guided meditation sessions at Tibet House. And so I thought, you know what, I'll look at the schedule and I'll just pop in one day. And so I looked at the schedule and I saw the name Sharon Salzberg. No idea who she was at the time. And I just thought, oh, she sounds Jewish, so I'll go to that. Literally, that's the reason why I went to the class, because I was like, we must have something in common. Like, her last name sounds Jewish, so she'll probably be like, I'll get where she's coming from. She'll get where I'm coming from. It's all good. And it was the first time I sat in that classroom at Tibet House. It was pretty incredible, because coming from a contemplative practice of Judaism, which was very like rigid. Remember, my parents were very, just adherent to the Jewish religion. And so we kept Shabbat, the Sabbath, the Jewish Sabbath. We kept kosher in the house and, kosher outside of the house. And I wasn't allowed to go anywhere on Friday nights, because of Shabbat, or on Saturdays. And so, kind of coming from this rigid culture of like, you pray 3 times a day. And when you pray, this is what you say, and this is how you say it. And, there's just all of these rules and sort of regulations, and the script is written for you, if you will. Sitting in that meditation class and practicing metta for the first time, loving kindness practice, was really incredible. It just, gave me this sense of connection, with sentient beings, with the universe, that I had never felt before in all of my years of just praying, and saying like rote prayers. And again, I'm not knocking prayers. Like, if it works for you, great, adhere to that. But for me, I always felt like it was very boxed in. I felt very boxed in, and I just thought, well, but this is what it is, like, I was born into this, and this is what it is. And this is what my parents did, and my grandparents and their parents, et cetera. And I sort of found this like other way, and it confused me for a long time, because, as I would sit and return back to those Wednesday guided meditation sessions, I was really confused, because I was like, am I being unloyal, like disloyal to my Jewish faith? And is this wrong? Like, is this sacrilegious? Am I like, doing something wrong? But it didn't feel wrong to me. And so I approached Sharon one day after class, and I waited for everyone to leave. And I think she thought I had like this really profound question to ask her. But the question was not profound at all. I actually, asked her, I said, Sharon, hi, I've been sitting in the back of the class. She's like, yeah, I know, I've seen you. And I said, I need to ask you a question. I know it's going to sound really weird, but are you Jewish? And she said, like, what is Jewish? Like, I'm a Buju or a Jubu, or, she just kind of said it in jest and laughed with her really very iconic, like beautiful, funny laugh. And I just was like, what does that even mean? And she said, you can hold two truths in duality. Like, you don't have to define yourself as one thing. Like, you can come from this place and still, have this practice. Like, it's not that one thing and the other can't coexist. And I was like, what? Like, and that just blew my mind open, because for the longest time, it was like, this is the way, this is the only way, and that was the message that I was given growing up. And so to understand and to be seated with that I could hold two truths in duality was huge for me. And it really blew open the doors for me. And so I really became a strong, adherent to meditation. And I will say that there were times in my life, especially as a young mother and when I became a single mom for a period of time, I became a crisis meditator. So I would only return to the cushion when things went awry. But but then after I had a medical diagnosis, I returned to the cushion permanently, and I've been meditating. It's a non-negotiable thing. It's like, I won't leave the house without, brushing my teeth. And I won't leave the house I won't show up in the world without meditating, because I'm definitely not the best version of myself if I don't, take that time for myself every morning.
Wow. I'm like, we have a lot in common. Talk about that another time. And wow, I just, I love, thank you for taking us back, first of all. And I think it's important to say this. And I remember, like, late 90s, this was not the same time we're in now. There were not yoga studios everywhere. Right.
Yeah.
No Lululemon. Like, I get it. Like, it was a totally different scenario. It was really on the rise, but not even yet. And so neat to hear your coming to, like, the way that you opened up, and that I'm even hearing this inner transformation for you, like going from being taught a certain, this is the way we do it. And I've heard
Yeah.
this from many people with whatever religion, whatever you're taught,
Mm-hmm.
it's like holding that space that both can exist. And that's really, really cool. Also, how you came to it through the Columbia University, and you said Robert, and then Sharon. I love Sharon, by the way. She is, I've heard her.
She's the best.
She is, and Tara, who I love as well, Tara Brock, both of them.
Yeah.
It's amazing that those were that's who you were learning with. I mean, that's like,
Yeah, no, Sharon is still a very big presence in my life. She actually wrote the afterword to the book, but
yeah.
And her wisdom is sprinkled throughout the book, but she is definitely, I always tell her, like, I am because you are, she is my Deepa Ma, so if you know anything about Sharon, you know that she started to meditate and, like, teach meditation and learn meditation from Deepa Ma in India. And so I always tell her, like, you're my Deepa Ma. You're the person in my life that has pushed me to, to this place, that told me that I could teach, that gave me the courage to write a book and have a voice. And absolutely, she's all of those things.
That's beautiful. Wow. And what were you, I'm just curious, what were you getting your degree in? Because you said it was not connected to
Yeah. So I was actually at Columbia getting a master's in public policy at the School of International Public Affairs. And, I always had a desire to, and maybe the naivety, and to some degree probably still do, that I was going to go change the world and help the world in some way. And so my desire was to actually work for an NGO, for like a UN organization or an NGO when I got out of school. And I actually, spent some time in Geneva working for the World Health Organization before anybody knew what the World Health Organization was, before the global pandemic, because, again, 20 some odd years ago. Wow. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty remarkable. The journey and the desire to learn and to gain, just knowledge for the pursuit of nothing else but gaining knowledge and kind of expanding yourself. And it led me down many different paths, right? Like I said, it led me to a class in the School of Social Work at Columbia about poverty, which seeded a huge, kind of just way of thinking about the world in me that very much resonates and very much led to the idea of, pandemic of love and the creation of it and mutual aid and the understanding of, like, this, redistribution of wealth, et cetera. So a lot of those sort of classes that I took that were outside of what I was supposed to be taking really stuck with me. I took a class with George Stephanopoulos that year, with Al Gore, in the School of Journalism. There were just so many incredible opportunities to learn. And I was like, where else am I going to get these opportunities? I took a class with Edward Said. So here I am, an Israeli Jew whose family is very hawkish, very right-wing, very conservative. At the time, my great uncle was the Minister of Defense in Israel. And here I am taking a class with, a Palestinian freedom fighter, that was incredibly controversial, and that probably everybody in my family was absolutely, vehemently like hating on. And I learned so much in his class, and again, seeded me for the rest of my life, and with respect to my philosophy, and my sympathies and my empathy and my working with Palestinian communities to help them achieve, their freedom and access human rights that they very much deserve to have.
Yeah. Ooh, I got chills, Shelly, as you're talking. A lot of this whole, what we talk about here is this idea of being your Youest you, right? You're listening to your authenticity and what's really driving you and your passions. And it's like, what's so cool with you is you went in for this master's degree in public policy. And as I'm listening, it's like just being open and open-hearted and open-minded. I'm even thinking, and I do want to hear more about the pandemic of love, but and I'm saying this for people listening too, because it's not linear is what I'm hearing. You had this desire to change the world, and it showed up and showing up different perhaps than what you had assumed.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Say more. Cause I love that. It's very inspiring for those of us that are like, oh, it can shift, just be open. So yeah, say more about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do say, that, and I say this ad nauseum as well to my son, who just rolls his eyes when he hears it. But, the most important thing we could do in life is show up, right? Show up consistently, deliberately, show up wholly and as fully as we can. And just, even when nobody shows up, we need to show up, and for ourselves and for others, et cetera. And so, and that, just like kind of having that as a mantra, or just that as the intention, right? That you just have as an underlying kind of theme in your life, it sends you into places and into spaces that you normally would never be in if you thought about it too much, right? If you thought, well, I don't have why would I go to that class? Like I don't I'm not getting a degree in that. Or, what is somebody going to think if I do that? Or I don't have the skills to do it. Or I didn't, whiteboard this enough. Or, what if I show up and nobody shows up? Or so all of these questions that we sort of have in our lives, and then we stand at the edge. We're like at this precipice, and we never take the leap because we overthink it. We're in this state of like paralysis. And so to some degree, and maybe to a fault, and it's maybe a blessing and a curse, but in my kind of philosophy in life has always been like, there's two kinds of people in the world, right? There's the what ifs and the why nots. And the what ifs are the people that just what if everything to death, and they never actually get anything done, or they just sort of, they ask way too many questions, and it just, to the point where sometimes it just can't happen. Things can't happen for them. And the why nots are the people who are like, well, all right, well, why not? Like, let me just try. What's the worst that can happen? I'll fail, and then I'll learn something, and I'll try again, and I'll try it differently, and I'll, have said that I tried to do this thing, but I didn't achieve it, but I'll have gained something. And so I'm more of that why not type of person, where, I'm like the type of person, like, here's a perfect example. Like, I remember after I had quit my job in corporate America, where I had been for close to 2 decades, I thought, well, what am I going to do? And so I decided to rent the Broward County Center for the Performing Arts, which is like this massive, like multiple thousands of persons, like theater. And I thought, I'm going to stage this meditation or this mindfulness, show, like, if you will, it's going to be called Broward Meditates. And I'm just going to, people will show up. I'm basically going to do like 90-minute sessions with like sound bath, and we're going to explain what mindfulness is and give people breathing practices and tools and lead them through a guided meditation. And I had no idea how I was going to do it. I had no idea who was going to participate, who was going to show up, how I was going to even cover my costs. But I just went in, picked a date, gave them a check, and was like, okay, now I have a date and I'm going to figure this out. This was like in May and the event was in September, and I had that period of time. So I was selling tickets to this thing that I had no idea what it was. And when people would ask me what it was, I would change the, explanation every single time until it finally like gelled, right? And it was beautiful. We sold out. It was incredible. But that's like a why not thing. Most people would be like, well, let me put all this together and let me figure this out and let me, get 17 degrees in this. And that, really actually leads into where the title Sit Down to Rise Up came from. It came from this place of deep frustration that I have with the industrial wellness complex that we are in a way forced to operate in, right? And I meet the same people. And when I don't mean the same usual suspects, I literally mean the same people when I go and, pre-COVID to these like conferences and workshops and I'm constantly like seeing the same faces in the audience. And I know some of these individuals. And so I'm always intrigued and like, I want to know what's going on in their life. And I'll ask like, so, well, what are you doing these days and what have you? And like, the responses are always like, oh, I'm working on this certification and I just finished that certification and I'm going on this retreat and I'm doing this. And I'm always so intrigued. And I look at them and I ask like, well, and great. Like, what are you planning on doing with that? Like, what is the purpose of doing all of this inner work if you're not connecting it to the outer world? And so that it was sort of my, the impetus of that question that actually came up. The phrase "sit down to rise up" came from, sitting on a stage with other activists, talking about the intersection of mindfulness and activism. And I looked out into the audience and I just said, like, if we're sitting down just for the purpose of like improving ourselves, but we're not rising up, like without the purpose of rising up, then what are we doing? Like we have to sit down to rise up. And so there was the title of the book.
Oh, I love it. I was actually going to ask you like what was the birth story? And that's super powerful. Yeah. Well, it's kind of like, what's the point? Like if you just keep that to yourself or just like, if you're not sharing or to make a bigger impact. And it's funny, this just keeps going back to that greater dream and desire. You said you had to change the world and now you're doing it with people, in this way that are, how to take that mindfulness, how to take that inner work and shine it outward. It's really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's pretty incredible to see how when you just kind of like push people a little bit, like, push somebody into the pool, so to speak.
Yeah.
Or strap them onto your back and jump off a cliff, with a parachute. How they finally like get it. They're like, oh, okay. Maybe I shouldn't overthink this. Maybe I should just like recognize that I do have the tools and that I've invested in myself and that I can't wait for this like start line of like when I'm perfect, when I have all this like figured out, no, it's like actually doing the work in the world helps you achieve all of those things, helps you become a better person, helps you show up differently, helps you become more interconnected and understand like how intra-connected we are, with others.
I'm so vibing and agree with what you're saying. And I loved your story about the Broward County Meditate. Like, and this is really good for anyone listening who's like, you have to have the flight plan. You got to know what you're doing. Like I find those who are in the entrepreneurial world and have that spirit, what I'm hearing from you is it was like, I'm just following the impulse. I want to do this. I will figure that stuff out as I go. And I love that it started to shift what you were even saying about it until you knew.
Yeah.
And, it's like that building the staircase, one at a time and before you can see it all. I mean, that's really powerful.
Yeah.
I love that story.
Well, I mean, I think also like we in the Western world, especially here in America, we celebrate entrepreneurial spirits so much. We celebrate entrepreneurs who are like, look at that. They're so genius. They came up with this idea. They're making money. They're solving a problem. And I'm thinking like, well, that's what community organizers really do on the ground in the trenches every single day. They see a problem in their community And yeah, they're, for lack of a better word, they're being entrepreneurial. They're saying there is a problem, we need to solve it in a creative way. And so I think that if we kind of all just start to shift our thinking about how we can take the lessons learned in the for-profit world and actually, just start thinking about how to navigate the problems in the world that the nonprofit world is trying to solve. Look at what Mark Cuban is doing. It's a perfect example with the drug company that he launched. That is literally slashing prices of drugs that are $9,000. If you go and buy it in the through a hospital or what have you for like $9. It's like ridiculous. And it's proof that there can be compassionate capitalism in this world, but also that we can really learn from capitalism, learn from entrepreneurs, and start to solve the major problems that are still afflicting this world that don't need to exist, because we have the tools, we have the technology. We just need to have the consensus and the willpower, and we need to eradicate the greed that exists.
I'm like, I feel like we need a whole other show to talk about, like, I want to hear your thoughts on how do we do that. Well, I know, let's talk a little bit about the pandemic of love, what you created. I want to hear, how did that originate? What does that consist of? Like, share the idea behind it.
Yeah.
Love that idea. Love that title.
Well, so Pandemic of Love accidentally, quote unquote, started. It wasn't ever intended to be this like global grassroots volunteer-led mutual aid movement, right? At this point now, it's a nonprofit disruptor, and I'll explain a little bit more about what that is in a minute. But it started with the desire to help my community, and that was it. It was, again, there is a problem, and I know how I'm feeling about the problem, and I have the tools from 20 years of being in the corporate world to maybe help solve that problem. Maybe not completely solve it in totality, but at least to help my community and the people that I care about, right? And so the idea here is that, I sat and I want to kind of bring in like meditation into this, because this is where the mindfulness is a huge game changer, at least for me, in terms of like how I come to think about certain problems and how I'm going to solve them, and how it helps for me to understand my emotions, right? And what I am feeling about certain things. And so, take yourself back again. We're going to go into that time machine. Take yourself back to March 2020, and things are starting to shut down. The situation in New York City and Seattle and other cities is like dire. We don't know a lot about the virus. There's no way to test it, really. There's a PPE shortage. There's a certain president that is the leader of the free world at the time. And so there's like all of this going on, this nonsense in March. And Florida, which is where I was living at the time, is always sort of the last holdout. It's like Texas falls first, and then always Florida is the one that's like, all right, I guess we have to get in line now. And so we were one of the last states to create a mandate to shelter in home, and to have social distancing and mask mandates, et cetera. But it was coming. It was inevitable, that this was going to happen. And so I, at the time, was leading my meditation community in South Florida, which had about 15,000 meditators in our kind of closed group, open to everybody, I will say. But like, what I mean is like, just having like a list of people that were part of our community. And, over the course of those 5 years that we had been meeting on the beach in Hollywood Beach, I got to know so many people and so many of their personal stories and their struggles, et cetera. And one of the beautiful things that had come out of that community was the fact that we were enacting mutual aid, which is essentially just an exchange of goods and services, a redistribution of wealth between person A and person B in a direct manner. So during, back to school, we would make sure that everybody in our communities, children, had the tools they needed, uniforms, backpacks, computers, etc., data, right? So when we think about wealth, when I say redistribution of wealth, people automatically think money, but people have data poverty, they have time poverty, they have, energy poverty. There's a lot of different types of poverty in this world. And, after hurricanes, which it was like a big thing in Florida during hurricane season, we would also suddenly a mutual aid, kind of organization, if you will, would rise up, and we would help people that were affected, that didn't have power, that didn't have food, that lost their roof, etc. Same thing during the holiday season. And so during the pandemic, I'm sitting there like knowing that we're about to shelter at home, knowing that there's people in my community that work in the hospitality industry that are already struggling to make ends meet, that are single moms or parents that depend on free and reduced lunch and breakfast at school, and suddenly would have to provide 10 additional meals to feed their kids, per week. I knew that there were kids that did not have laptops, were not going to be able to go to class, that didn't have, internet at their homes, and so on. All of these things that, you start to think about that we take for granted, really, when we have enough, when we're able to make ends meet, when we're in the middle class, and we're not as affected, that really set people even more behind. And so I started to, kind of just move into and move from a fight, flight, freeze mode, which is natural. We were all in that fear mode, at that moment in time. But we can move and evolve beyond fight, flight, freeze into what scientists are now calling the tend and befriend mode, which I will say that women are more inclined to naturally do. Especially mothers, right? We just have that like nurturing quality. And so I, for a long time, was calling before I even heard the term tend and befriend, was calling it empathy action mode. And so in kind of leaning into tools from our wise elders, like the tool of rain, right? Which Tara Brach teaches, right? Sitting with my emotions, recognizing, labeling it, as Dr. Dan Siegel says, name it to tame it, tame, like, just what is it that I'm feeling? I'm feeling fear. I'm feeling angst. I'm feeling, and just understanding the quality of what I'm feeling helps me to push past it, right? And understand that, yes, I can nurture what I'm feeling. I can investigate it, nurture it, etc. But then I have 2 follow-up questions that literally everybody that's listening to this can do. Once you've identified what it is that you're feeling in any situation in your life, not personal and, at large, ask yourself the following 2 questions. First, ask yourself, what can I do about this? So, for example, if you're angry about something, you ask yourself, or you identify that you're feeling angry. I'm feeling anger, I'm feeling angst, I'm feeling rage, I'm outraged by this thing that's happening in my life or in the world or in my community. And what am I going to do about it? When you're ready to ask the question, right? But there's an important follow-up question, because sometimes when you have feelings like anger, you're reactive, not responsive, right? You're reactive, and you think to yourself, oh, I'm angry. I've identified that I'm angry about this thing. I'm really pissed off. What am I going to do about it? This is what I'm going to do about it, right? And sometimes the response to that question is not a nice thing. It's not the kind thing to do. So the follow-up question is always, and how do I come from a place of love? So that always leads me to the place where I have all my answers about how I'm going to show up in the world. And so I'm feeling really like worried. I'm feeling angst. I'm feeling, just all of these emotions that I've identified as it pertains to the very real threat of the pandemic and the shutdowns. And I think, what am I going to do about it? And how do I come from a place of love? And I think, okay, well, we can use this model that we use during, the holiday season to make sure that families have gifts, that they're fed for the days that the kids are out of school, they have everything that they need. And we can create this like sort of open forum. And so how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to create 2 Google Forms. And one of them is going to be give help, and one of them is going to be get help. And then I'm going to match people. Once they identify, like if one person checks off, I need my cell phone bill paid or my Wi-Fi bill paid, and another person says, I'm willing to pay somebody's Wi-Fi bill or cell phone bill, I'll connect the two of them directly, and they will have to have a conversation, because I also thought about the fact that we're now in a time of social distancing and we're in a time of disconnection. So how do we connect people directly and give them the opportunity to, feel heard and seen on both sides of the equation, right? So that was a pretty incredible, revelation. The idea that there's no need for a middleman, that there's no need for a bank account, there's no need for a 501c3, but that rather, if I can connect people directly, that there's, yes, that need is being met, but also friendships are being formed. People are feeling heard. People who have more than enough are able to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes and meet somebody within their community that they never would have met otherwise, because we tend to stay kind of within our, radius, right? We're not driving to the other sides of the track, so to speak, and having deep conversations with people, on a regular basis. So that's really how Pandemic Love started, was just two simple links. I created a video, 40-second long video to explain it, put it up on my Instagram and Facebook account, again, thinking that I'm only helping the people in my immediate community. And I woke up the next morning and that post went viral, pun intended, because it actually went around the world and came back in 24 hours. It was shared by so many different influencers, people from Kristen Bell to Deborah Messing and Maria Shriver and Chelsea Handler, et cetera. And it was incredible because I was getting messages from all over the world, and so many people had filled out that form. And I realized, oh my God, like I need to scale this, and I need volunteers, and I can't sit behind a computer for 16, 17 hours a day making like connections, because I'll never unearth myself from this. And so I started to create these micro chapters and train other people to be chapter leaders. And so fast forward now in March of this year, it'll be 2 years since we started the organization. And we have connected over 2.1 million people who have directly transacted over $61 million. And we're in 16 countries and have 280 chapters, which is amazing. And it proves that mutual aid is scalable, it's replicable, it's sustainable, and it's an amazing way for there to be, for us to create a safety net within our communities and create true equity within our community. Because what happens is that in true mutual aid, circles, what happens is that every single person in that community becomes somebody who needs something and somebody who can give something, right? Regardless of their socioeconomic status, every single one of us has something we can offer in this life. Even if we don't have money, right? We can babysit for somebody, we can mow a lawn, we can listen to somebody and just spend an hour with like a senior or a person who needs like attention. There's so many different ways that we can enact mutual aid on a daily basis. And I think a lot of times people feel, again, going back to this point of like, throwing your hands up in the air or being the what if type of person, well, what can I do? Like, I'm one person, and we start to like overthink it. Like, I don't have money, I can't do this, but we tend to forget all of the other things we can do, And so I think that if we can all agree that yes, humans biologically evolved to, flee from that saber-toothed tiger, and protect ourselves with fight, flight, freeze, but that we can actually continue to evolve beyond that and really show up differently in the world and recognize, oh, wait a minute, okay, I'm not being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. This isn't a life-threatening issue. I can actually show up for others in this moment, and therefore also show up for myself and not feel helpless.
Wow. Shelly, that is really incredible. Again, you're demonstrating this kind of like their meditation Broward County situation where you're like, I want to help. You didn't even realize it was gonna, do what it did. And I love that it was just so simple of these two docs, like get help, give help. And
Mhm.
love what you also said. I'm just thinking for everyone listening, like it doesn't have to be monetary. And that's such a good point. It can be that listening ear. It's a really good
Yeah,
point. Most people, I mean, I know just in studying this area, like most people don't feel listened to and really like they have that time and being heard. And so that could be, giving, like you said, giving an hour of your time listening or babysitting
yeah,
or food shopping or whatever it might be. It's really so
that's
powerful.
huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. Listen, I have a friend who's an amazing friend that I actually talk about in the book. Her name's Samantha Novick, and I met her through March for Our Lives, and she was a Marjorie Stoneman Douglas alum, and her father was the vice mayor of Parkland when the shooting happened at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, and we became really good friends and worked together. And she started an organization called Wings of Friendship, which is during the pandemic, because she recognized that a lot of the people, she's a speech pathologist, and a lot of the people that she works with who are individuals that have, special needs or, have chronic illness or suffered from an accident or something, were so lonely. They're already people who are challenged in social situations, and now all of a sudden they're sheltering at home and they have no connection with the outside world.
Yeah.
So she put together this beautiful virtual camp, friendship camp, and brought all of these individuals together from different parts of the country and different age groups, and people who literally are suffering from the same afflictions, from loneliness, from not being accepted, from being different, and from other types of challenges. And now there's this beautiful organization that formed because she was like, here's a problem that I'm seeing. I'm very sad for the people that I work with, hearing their stories. What can I do about it? And how do I come from a place of love? And so she facilitated this beautiful organization just using Zoom, which essentially is a free thing. It's not free, you have to pay for Zoom, but for the most part, it's not that expensive. And so it's just incredible what we can do when we ask those two simple questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Those questions of what can I do about this and how can I come from a place of love, which I love. I love that.
Yeah.
Really powerful. I could talk to you, and I know we're gonna have you back. When your next book comes around. I always like to ask, so I call them heart flares, where your heart is like,
Sure.
I have something that I'd not said. I just want to, ask if there's anything either I didn't ask you or just maybe an intuitive nudge or word of wisdom or something else you'd like to share with our beautiful community. I mean, there's so many nuggets here, but with what's going on now, we're still in this pandemic time. Anything
Yeah.
else you'd like to share, Shelly?
Wow. Okay. That's a big question.
Yeah, I'll narrow it down. Is there anything that I didn't ask or anything that's just
No,
still
no,
there?
I'm actually pulling something up on my phone right now because there is something
Awesome.
that I want to share with people at this moment. And and this is something that I actually recently posted on my Instagram page. And that is, and I wrote, on my Instagram page, you will find that it is necessary to let some things go simply because they are too heavy. And the caption that I wrote was actually related to grief and loss. I'm a trauma-informed teacher, so I work a lot with, as I said, survivors of gun violence and the families of the victims. And, during the last 2 years, people have experienced a lot of loss, tangible loss, like the loss of life for sure. But I also want to kind of bring our attention to ambiguous loss, which is something that a lot of people are starting to talk about, ambiguous loss being something that, maybe is unseen or is not tangible, but is material to you, right? The loss of a way of life, the loss of, connection with certain people. Another example of ambiguous loss could be like when one of your parents may suffer from dementia, so they're still physically here, but you've lost them, like, because they're not the same person that they were, right? Before they started to lose their memory. And so, I think that we need to be more gentle with ourselves. And we need to really start to create more space for ourselves. And in the book, I talk a lot about self-care, right? The book is centered around how radical self-care can change the world. But really what I want us to focus on is how we are indeed interconnected, that the self doesn't begin and end with this physical body that we have, but rather it extends far beyond to every single person that we touch, on a daily basis, in our lives, in our communities. And so the way that I think we can assist each other, this kind of pulls it all together, right? The concept of mutual aid, the concept of mindfulness, the concept of self-care, which is very individualistic when you think about it, and shifts it all into communal care. How do we show up for each other? How do we help each other carry each other's burden? So we can put something down simply because it's too heavy, but know that there are other people who will help us carry that boulder along the way as well. And so I guess this is my plea to say to individuals, like, start to formalize and think about how you can create safety nets and communities of care, not just in times of crisis, but in times when things are okay and quote unquote normal. Because there will always be a rainy day. There are always peaks and valleys in this life. And when you have a formalized community of care in place, you'll never feel like the boulder is too heavy to carry, because you're always going to have people who can carry that with you.
Amazing. That was what we call the drop the mic. I'm like, really have nothing else to add to that? That was beautiful. Well, it's a great call to action and reminder for all of us that I love how you tied this in, the mindfulness, the mutual aid, the self-care, but like, how are we, it's kind of like your two questions. It's almost like the add-on question is, how are we doing this for each other? How are we creating this? And I am so with you in this. And I love this, not love the term ambiguous loss, but what you were talking about it. Like, I sense this is part of the trauma I think everyone is experiencing on some level. I felt it at times, and I'm a pretty resilient person. I'm like, you know what? I kind of just miss like walking outside, go to a store and not thinking about a mask or this or that. Like, just, it's not the same. Yeah.
Right. But it's a real thing. And I think we suppress that, right? As a society, we think like, oh, I can't be sad about that or feel grief over that because somebody else lost a parent or a spouse or, a child to this, so somebody else has it worse. But I always tell people, like, saying that you can't be sad because somebody has it worse is like saying you can't be happy because somebody has it better. That's not even like a real thing, Stop saying that. If that's what you're feeling, then feel into that and identify what it is that you're feeling and then move beyond that.
Yeah. I thank you for that reminder. It's, we've talked a lot here about that feel to heal. You cannot, I did a lifetime where I did not feel and went around. It does not work. You got it. And I love what you're saying. Yeah. Don't deny it or dismiss it. It's there for a reason.
Right. Yeah.
Amazing, Shelly. I just want to honor and acknowledge you. Thank you for who you are, how you're showing up, this whole, I want to change the world. Like, you can just hear, if I can get spiritual with you for a minute, you can just hear the universe, the divine, whatever you call it, working
Mhm.
with you, as you, through you. And I think the message is for all of us, like, take this wisdom and inspiration from Shelly and ask yourself these questions. How do I allow that energy of divine love, of care, to shine through you, to be, to act through you as you? And it's just clear and it's beautiful listening to you. You are expressing and connecting to that energy and to that. To me, that's what it's about, and doing that for others. So I just think it's fantastic, and so honor you, truly.
Thank you, Julie. I really appreciate it. Thank you for all you're doing in the world. Thanks for this platform and for these opportunities to have these important conversations, in a time when it can feel stigmatized,
Yeah.
to be talking about certain things. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And I'm just going to remind everyone, I'm going to have show notes, Shelly's info, her book info. You can find all things Shelly Tygielski, and we just salute you, and so grateful for you, Shelly. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.